This is Durham, a city home to one of the most prestigious universities in the UK. Throughout its history, Durham has seen its university and local communities grow side by side. Yet, in recent years, some locals have expressed concerns that there are too many students in Durham and feel priced out of their own homes. Students themselves have also been unable to afford increased rent demands from landlords and colleges, and are also facing the latest UCU strikes. In addition to these divides, a recently elected coalition of Liberal Democrat, Conservative and Independent councillors have agreed to join a devolution deal with 6 other North East authorities and Westminster that will create a new framework for investment in the region. Today, both students and locals will have the opportunity to put their questions to the decision makers of Durham and ask, what are local politicians and student leaders doing about the issues that matter to them? Where is Durham heading? What is the future of this historic city?
Hello and welcome to the first ever edition of PalTV Debates. My name is Izzy Jones and I'll be the moderator for the discussion. The focus of our debate today will be the future of Durham. We'll be focusing on 3 topics: the Durham student housing crisis, the UCU strike action at Durham University, and the new North East devolution deal. On our panel today is Mary Foy, Labour MP for the City of Durham since 2019. Before entering Parliament, she worked on Gateshead Council, where she held the portfolio for health and wellbeing. She is best known as a vocal opponent of the Conservative government and a staunch trade unionist, who was on the picket line during the UCU strikes. The second member of our panel is Amanda Hopgood, Liberal Democrat and leader of Durham County Council. She was elected to this position in 2021 and runs the council in coalition with Conservative and Independent councillors. Recently, she signed the LA7, making County Durham part of the devolution deal for the North East that could see over £3 billion invested across the region over the next 30 years. Next we have Josh Freestone, the undergraduate academic officer for the Durham Students' Union. Responsible for representing the academic interests of students at Durham, Joshua has been a vocal critic of the university management throughout his tenure. A passionate socialist and UCU supporter, he was a notable opponent of the referendum held by the Durham Students' Union over whether they should support the strikes, which he described as navel-gazing. Our fourth guest is Urwah Mirza, JCR President of Josephine Butler College. She was elected after running on a platform of increasing engagement with and transparency within JCR, and she is presiding over a period of transition after Josephine Butler's JCR members voted to become independent from the university's governance under the Durham Student Organisation framework from 2021. And our final panellist is Daniel Hodgson, co-editor-in-chief of Palatinate, Durham University's official student paper. Daniel has covered news in Durham since he arrived in 2021. He was influential in the coverage of the housing crisis during October, appearing on national outlets to discuss the issue, and has also led coverage of political events in the city and county, including the UCU Industrial Action. For the sake of transparency, PalTV would like to make clear that we invited the University Vice-Chancellor to be a part of the panel, but our request was declined. We also invited Conservatives, but they could not attend. Today, students will have the opportunity to put their questions directly to the decision makers of Durham. With that, students will share their voice about the issues that matter to their local community. This is PalTV Debates, the future of Durham. We'll be moving on to our first topic for today, the Durham student housing crisis. As many students know, this academic year in particular, Durham has experienced an acute housing rush. As soon as the academic year starts, pressure mounts to secure a house for the next year. Correspondingly, prices have also increased dramatically above inflation. The panic to secure housing for next year culminated in students camping on the streets overnight outside estate agents. A week later, students staged a housing protest drawing further attention to the issue. As the city becomes increasingly saturated with students, this is having a knock-on effect for local residents who are having to move increasingly far out, including to surrounding villages. And, as of an hour ago, the university has revealed that accommodation prices for colleges will rise by 10.3%, taking a standard catered room over £9,000 per year for the first time ever. So, let's start with an audience question, shall we? Hands up, good, thank you.
Who should students really blame for the housing shortage?
Okay, who should students blame for the housing shortage? Would anyone like to start us off with this?
Yeah, go on then. I think through our reporting of the incidents as they occurred throughout October, students overwhelmingly blamed the university. It was debated whether it should be the council or the university or a mixture. However, when we spoke to people queuing outside those estate agents, almost all of them were saying the university, they need to stop accepting students, they need to reduce their intake. I mean, currently there are still about 96 properties available on stu rents for this next academic year, 23-24. And so the university were right when they said there is enough accommodation in Durham. It's just the affordability, because only 8 of those properties are less than £159 per week per person. So I think that's where the problem lies in.
Thank you, Dan. Josh, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I think he's right. I think students should blame the university, but also the government. It goes without saying, housing in Durham is well past breaking point. It's not a new issue. For years, it has been in crisis, and it's been a can that has been kicked down the road year on year on year until we got to this point. I think there are 3 key issues with housing: quality, affordability, and availability. And I think on the availability point, the university is continuing to raise admissions and take more and more students into Durham with very little regard for the housing in the city. And the university have yet to admit a responsibility on housing. I want the university to admit that they have a responsibility to make sure every student they let in is housed and has a roof over their heads. But at the same time, we can't be under the illusion that Durham is unique on this issue. Across the country, there is a housing crisis and nothing is being done about it. When we look to the government, the only time we hear students mentioned is as political footballs in a Tory culture war. Whilst we're struggling with a cost of living crisis and a housing crisis, I think students should be asking for far more from the government, and an urgent review into the student housing crisis needs to be commissioned on a national level.
Thank you. Mary, we know the housing issue specific to Durham is something you've raised in Parliament, but there's been relatively limited impact in terms of getting the government to even measure the impact of oversaturation of the Durham housing market with students. Would you say this is a failure of opposition or a failure of government?
Well, obviously it's a failure of government. They're the ones in power at the minute. And I guess I wouldn't disagree with anything that the others on the panel have said, but also I think this crisis, this year when we're seeing the hundreds of students lined up outside the letting agents, those letting agents were at fault, massively at fault, for releasing the houses the way they did. I wrote to the 10 of the letting agents to ask them why they did it and what they would do differently in the future. Unfortunately, only 2 of them responded and didn't really give me an answer. The raising of rents, as you mentioned earlier, so it was an average of £80 to £100 a week for a student, and now you're likely to be paying more than £200 a week, as well as having the cost of living crisis. This is really affecting mainly those lower income students, well, lower and that squeezed middle families of students who are now, we're seeing they're getting the least desirable properties, and it's actually there are a number of students now who won't come to Durham or won't go to university at all because they can't afford it. So the government need to deal with maybe the cap on rents, or it's really help with the cost of living. I know that might be getting off the subject slightly, but the maintenance grants that were announced, which would help students, those maintenance loans are now 2.8% uplift, all that you've been offered, which is an absolute disgrace. And whereas we heard this week, the Labour government in Wales have an uplift of over 9%. So why can't our government raise the maintenance loans to 9% now? I've just written to the minister this week, Gillian Keegan, with 40 other ministers, members of Parliament across Parliament, asking her to do something about it. This kind of continue for students. Students have landed in so much debt before they even start, and they have to have somewhere to live, and the government need to act.
Great, thank you, Mary. Should we take another question from the audience? Anyone got questions?
Thank you. Given the oversaturation of Durham city centre, do you think in the next few years we're going to see kind of expansion of where students are living? And do you think that there'll be a lot more people coming in from surrounding towns as well?
Thank you. Amanda, the council plays a role in this. Would you like to answer this?
I don't, sorry, I don't think that you'll see people going out as far. I think what you'll see is a change in the way student accommodation is provided. And what we've had for too long is the council and the university working in silos and not working together to address issues. And that's something that has to change. Durham City is very proud to be a university city, but it is a city with a university. And that is very important that we take that into consideration. It is not a university with a city attached to it. And we have residents within the city who would like to live in the city. And I think mixed communities is really important. My daughter went to university in another part of the country, lived in a mixed community, lived next door to an old lady, and the student community there with the residents worked exceptionally well. That's something I'd love to see in Durham with mixed communities, that we have that, but we have to have that within the city centre. Because when we do this, it also has to be driven and guided around other things that residents need and students need. So doctors, access to local facilities. If we want to bring residents back into the city, we need to increase the schools. We wouldn't have, if all of a sudden every house that a student lived in and all the terraces went back into residential use, then we wouldn't have the schools capacity to do that. So there is a very fine balance, and it's got to be about working together. But I do think that the university need to work extremely close in terms of letting people know that they're going to expand their numbers, because you can't just add all students into the equation and think by magic something's going to happen. You can't just build accommodation overnight. You can't just build facilities overnight. So it is very much about partnership working and making sure all the parts of the jigsaw come together to make sure it's a really good package for the people who come and want to work and live in Durham for the future.
Thank you. And just to follow up on houses with multiple occupancy, do you think there's an issue that the government's only registering them as with at least 5 bedrooms?
It's really difficult, because if you do that, you've got, if there's more than 2 names in the house, then it's classed as an HMO for residential purposes. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a house of multiple occupation. With the way people and families live now, you could have 4 or 5 people who aren't a house of multiple occupation but all have different names. So it is very different. There is guidance. I think there needs to be more. I do think government do need to step up to the mark when it comes to student accommodation, when it comes to quality, when it comes to students overall. There are things in place, but there needs to be more, absolutely.
Great, thank you very much.
Sorry, can I also just add, I'm going to have to slightly disagree with you, Amanda, when you said that you don't think that students will be pushed out into cities and towns outside of Durham. I think what we're seeing and what the students have been telling us is that they're already being moved further and further away from the city centre, which not only distances them from accessing their education, but we've also seen an additional surplus of students missing out on wider student experience opportunities and feeling as if they are isolated because they physically are in a location that's far away from their peers, from the people that are teaching them, and from the rest of the community at Durham. I think, especially being such a small city and being such a tightly knit community with the college system, it's very difficult for students who are now having to live in places like Stockton or Bowburn. Not only are they missing out on opportunities to physically be present, but we're seeing, especially with student support and student wellbeing, a lot more issues crop up with students feeling isolated and trapped far away. So I think I agree with all of your points about the university working with council and local authority to ensure that those who go to university have an opportunity to live in the city centre or as close as they can be, to make sure that they're getting the best out of the education that they're paying for.
Can I just come back? What I said was I didn't think that would be a problem in the future, because what I think will happen, and you've seen it already happening if you go up Silver Street, is a lot of the shops, because the way the high street has changed, people don't want to take shop premises that are 3 and 4 stories high because of the business rates. All they can do is the first floor. So what you're seeing it's a change in attitude and a change in policy where some of properties that would never have been student accommodation in the past will become student. So I think you'll see the student accommodation within the city centre increase, which will take away that need for them to move further out, because I agree with you. The whole part of a big part of student life is the student experience and being here, not having to spend half an hour on a bus to get to where you live. And I speak as someone who, and it isn't a problem that's unique. My son has been at Naval College at South Shields. He had someone move into his house who's at Newcastle University because they couldn't get accommodation in Newcastle. So they're having to travel from South Shields to Newcastle every day because it was cheaper and easier. And that's something that has to be addressed.
Great, thank you. Should we take another audience question? Yep. Yes, you hand over there. Sorry. Yeah, thank you.
Hello, good morning. Are the forgotten victims of this student housing crisis the local people have been priced out of the city? Can I just say it's only ever going to get worse now? It's all about investment, and if you get investors coming in that can pay the house off in 5 years on a £220,000 house, you're going to get this city flooded with investors trying to make money from students.
Great. Mary, would you like to take this question?
Yeah, I think it's an absolute scandal, actually, the student rented market. I remember when my daughter went to university in Leeds, I could not believe what they were paying for real substandard accommodation as well. And that's, I think, aside from the number of students or houses that students are living in, I think it's the quality of them. Some of those landlords are just getting away with providing, as I say, substandard for what, £200 a week? So what there needs to happen, it's part the government. I know the council are currently working with the university, with Jeremy, with the university, about addressing some of the issues about what is available out there and what sort of type of accommodation it is and what the standards are. And they've tried in the past to have a voluntary landlord register about those quality landlords that are available. But of course, it's voluntary, so a lot of the landlords don't sign up to it. So that needs to have government legislation to change that. Because we can't just let anybody. Well, what is happening is anyone's coming along and letting a house out, and they're not. The students get the blame for it. But the gardens aren't kept nice. The rubbish, there might be rubbish in the gardens. It might not be look very tidy. But that's quite often that the landlord isn't doing the work that they should be doing. So yeah, it's a tricky one. And the university have. I meet with Karen quite regularly. And I'm not here to defend the university at all, but they have said that obviously everyone will get a bed. They're trying to move away from the current situation of overloading the city centre with students, but they have assured me that there won't be the huge numbers, the influx that there has been over the last few years, and they are settling down with their figures of the numbers that they're taking in. But I've been very clear that they kind of just keep expanding infinitely, and it has to stop at some point. And yes, there needs to be something done about the types of landlords coming in and investing in the city and really ripping people off.
I just say that I think that's right. And that's what's happened with what you would call family homes. And that's where the family homes have been transferred into houses of multiple occupation. And that's why it's important that we have a look at that and make sure that it's actually student accommodation that's built so that we have these mixed communities. Because as a city, we need a mixed use. We need to have people here when you all go home. I was in Durham, and I know I'm old, but I was in the week before Christmas, the Monday night before Christmas, and all the students had gone home. Quite rightly, my children had come home, and me and 3 school friends were in Walkergate at 10 o'clock at Monday night, and we were the only 4 people in the Slug and Lettuce. So we were the only 4 people at 10 o'clock at night, 5 days before Christmas. We need communities in Durham to keep the city going, and that has to be all year round. So that is really important. So everything that the student at the university brings, there needs to be something for when you go home to your hometowns and do the same. So that, for me, as a leader of a council, is extremely important that we have that diverse economy that keeps going all year round. Otherwise, there's nothing left for you when you do come back. And I know I'm too old to be in the slogan letters at 10 o'clock on a Monday night, so apologies.
That's all. In response to that and the idea of preserving mixed communities, this is a question for all the panel. Do you think there should be an increased focus on Durham students living in college to resolve the housing crisis? The university has a vision of 50% of students living in college in their 7-year plan. What do we think of this?
Students sometimes aren't the most keen because of the culture that's developed, but I find when you talk to people, they expect the university experience of first year living in college, getting to know their friends, and then on the whole, of course there are many exceptions, but on the whole wanting to second, third and potentially fourth years living with their friends in the city, and that obviously contradicts planning that is being put in place for greater student numbers within accommodation. The CD referring to the 10-year plan there with by 2027 they want 50% living in college with only 1,000 more students than we have now. So that would definitely, I think it would reduce the numbers living in the city by about 15%, which could help maybe with the balance of local versus students. But yeah, the issue is it might be the university wanting one thing, and a good example of the university and local politicians working together wanting something, but it might actually be the students that don't always want it, because certainly the people I've spoken to about it always say, oh, thank as much as I enjoyed my time in college, thank goodness we're living in the city now, because it's a different experience, and it's an experience that I think people do want more of.
Joshua, can I bring you in?
Yeah, I echo what Dan said. I think students like the freedom to be able to pick whether or not they want to live in college or in private accommodation. There are benefits to both. Both are quite an important university experience. Also, there are quite serious questions about whether or not colleges would be able to meet that capacity.
Josh, can I just ask something to you there with it? Do you believe then the university when they say about by 2027, 4 or 5 years from now, only wants to go up by 1,000 more people? Because obviously in 2013-14 there were 5,000 less than there are now. Do you think you can, in your position as a SAT, can you trust the university?
Based on prior year, we've seen the can being kicked down the road year on year. I'm not convinced that will stop. Unless there's quite serious rethinking, but I can't see substantial changes being made to admissions and expansion anytime soon.
So, stealing Dan's question, which was very good, Mary and Amanda, do you trust the university's promises?
I think you have. You have to take people at face value of what they say. I think what needs to happen with the accommodation, and this for far too long, the college accommodation was one size fits all with catering accommodation, and that was probably one of the biggest issues for years. Was one, the cost, and two was that lack of probably independence, because you had to go in, you had set meal times, that kind of thing, which is a lot of what people would want differently. So I think actually working with the purpose-built student accommodation as opposed to college accommodation is more of the way forward, so that it is that independence.
Thank you, Mary.
Yeah, I think exactly when you asked the question, I thought, hey, I'm not in a position to answer this, because it's about what the student experiences and what you want. And it seems as if this plan, the university, it sounds as if they think they have your best interest at heart, because it might be better accommodation and cheaper than what we've heard that these exploitative landlords can charge. But if I was a student now, I wouldn't want to be in that situation. I'd like that student experience. So if the plans are that they are more the purpose-built accommodation, then that's fair enough. And in terms of whether I trust them or not, I'd have to take them at their word. But I will be holding them to account as well.
Great, thank you. And I guess also another barrier to students coming back into college is also the increased accommodation prices, which I will recognise has only been released about an hour ago. So it's okay if you guys aren't completely prepped. But what do we think the student response is or will be to increased housing prices? Do we think this is going to stop any movement into colleges?
I think as it stands, having really briefly looked at the figures this morning, living in college actually does work out cheaper still than living in town. I don't think that's necessarily a benefit. I think it's actually a huge disadvantage because it just shows how ridiculous the prices outside of college are. For some students, living in college now will be too expensive, but they have no other alternatives because living out is so much more expensive. I think it's not really an issue where one is better than the other, or one is cheaper than the other. I think both have their benefits, but both also have huge disadvantages in the pricing range.
Great, thank you. I just want to give us a 5-minute warning, but would any of the panel like to come in? I'd like short replies, please, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. I would say with the 10.3% increase to both accommodation and catering within college, it's a positive, I think, from the university to see that while it may not be good enough to some students, that the Durham grant increase for the next academic year, 13.6%, is larger than the increase to accommodation fees, which maybe you wouldn't expect from the university, but I think that's a positive, definitely. As Urwah says, with regards to private in the city, it is very, very concerning. I was looking also at 24-25 academic year just to see. There was a couple of properties out there, one of which was £225 per week, bills included, 8-person bed in the viaduct. So you're thinking with bills, that's easily over £1,000 a month. So clearly, while it was good, the awareness that was raised in the paper or by the protests, there hasn't been a material change yet, which I think is concerning, definitely.
And I was just going to say, I think if that I hadn't realised about that issue around the meals that's all in, and if you don't eat the meals, then you're losing out. I think if that can be worked on and that sort of policy change to reflect what's happening now with the cost of living, which isn't going away anytime soon. I know Jeremy Cook has started recently since the issue with the students having to line up outside of the letting agent. There is a housing group now that's taken off, so hopefully there's a strong student voice on that housing group, and you can sort some of these issues out. But one of the other things that was really stark about what happened in the summer was the fact that some of these students who were lining up overnight to try and get accommodation, they hadn't been left home very long, and they're having to sign contracts, these legal documents. It's something they've never had to do before, and they've been pushed into to signing these contracts on houses that they hadn't even seen, and having to share with people that they didn't know, because the panic was so great that they thought they would just miss out completely. So if the university can try and rein that in and provide accommodation that suits yourselves, and helps with that student experience, but also gives you that security of rent and standard, then that would be only a good thing.
Thank you, Mary. Amanda and Josh, you've got 1 minute, so quick responses, please.
I'll quickly say, in response to the fee increases, I think it is a disgrace during cost of living crisis to allow such extortionate rises to rent. Students will be protesting this. The Students' Union will join them. We will support them, and we'll be putting pressure on the university for immediate reversal to any such decision, and there'll be a statement hopefully later today from us regarding it.
Great, thank you, Amanda.
Yeah, I think that we need to accept that the world has moved on significantly from when the colleges were first established, in terms of especially around the catered colleges, and we need to accept what people would like now. And I speak as someone who, as a child, spent a lot of time at Hatfield, because my granddad was the bursar and my grandma was the housekeeper at Hatfield. Nothing has changed there when I went back to the senior common room in terms of 40 years later, and look at that, it's still catered accommodation, but the world has changed and everyone needs to catch up with where we are now, and I think that's the important thing that we need to look at.
Okay, so we're now going to move on to the UCU strikes. Following years of intermittent strike action at universities, the UCU voted in a national ballot in October to take part in industrial action over issues regarding pensions and working conditions. They subsequently took 4-day strike action in November and have taken part in action short of a strike since the end of November. In response, the Durham Students' Union held a referendum where nearly 60% of students voted for them to commit to support all student industrial action, making this their official position. Despite requests to the SU and Durham UCU members, the university declined to use withheld strike wages for student support. The UCU have also recently announced 18 days of strike action in February and March and a marking boycott in April. Can we take an audience question, please?
Which body should students trust to ensure that their interests are being represented during the strike?
Great, thank you, Joshua, as the representative for the official students' body.
Yeah, I like to think you can trust the Students' Union. We will be campaigning and pushing for the university to meet the demands of our staff. We'll also be making sure that any content that's been missed during strike days will not come up during exams. Yeah, I'd like to think we will support you. The academic part of the SU, we are always just an email away throughout the period. Yeah.
Interesting. I'd also just like to come back to you on some postgraduates have cited the fact that they have no representation among the SU officers, and they have a grievance against the referendum being allowed to take because some of them are also teaching as well as students. This is, of course, to the SU postgraduate officer having to step down, but the Constitution means that a successor has not been able to elected. Do you think that because of ensuing strike action, the Constitution should be changed?
I think there are definitely questions to be asked and options to be explored. I cannot here declare huge changes to the Constitution without SU Assembly or my other sabbatical officers. I think it's really regrettable the position we're in terms of PG representation. They absolutely deserve representation, and sadly we're limited in our capacity to do that. We've recently appointed a PGR to represent that cohort of student in kind of university levels. It's absolutely not ideal, and all I can do is apologise for that. It's something we didn't predict, and it's something I'm sure we'll think of in future years to come.
Great, thank you. Can I bring you in as another representative of a student body? What thoughts do you have around students being affected by the strikes?
So obviously 18 days of strike action will hugely affect students, as well as the marking boycott. As Josh said, really all we can do in our position as sabbaticals is be there to support the students. I know that I also experienced strike action when I was a student. I was absolutely on the side of the UCU. I completely understand why they're doing it, and I do feel sympathy for them, but it is the students that are suffering. I think the university really needs to look into the effects that this is having on students and perhaps renegotiate and re-explore their options, because there are obviously options that can be taken. I think that whilst the UCU have absolute solid grounds to stand on, it's really the students that are suffering the most here through no fault of their own. They have all, you said that the majority of them have voted to support UCU workers, which is absolutely brilliant. It shows that it's a good and just cause to fight for. It unfortunately then just means that the students who are supporting the UCU will be negatively affected. And we've already kind of seen the backlash of this with more people coming to student support and student wellbeing, worried about their grades. Obviously, 18 days is a significant strike action, and with the potential of a marking boycott as well, it might mean that some students don't see the grades that they would like to see at the end of the year, which will then negatively impact them throughout the rest of their lives.
Josh, I'd just like to come back to you. We've said that the majority of students have voted, but when we look at who actually turned up for the referendum, it was less than 1,000 students who voted, which is less than 10% turnout. How much credibility do you think the SU actually has in taking this position?
Well, I was elected on an explicitly pro-UCU mandate. I don't think my position on it could be doubted by anyone. So with the other SABs, no one stood an anti-UCU platform. And I think that's a mandate enough for a pro-UCU position. But we've done the referendum on top of that, which is the biggest democratic exercise the Students' Union has conducted on a single issue in recent years. And it was a whopping majority. It was huge. No one can question our students' commitment to supporting our staff, supporting our lecturers and the UCU. I'd also say, if you have any doubt of student solidarity, turn up to the picket lines. Look at the sheer number of students who turn up to those, who stand with their staff. I think it's pretty conclusive.
Another question I want to pose is, obviously these strikes are national, so realistically, what can the university be doing? I'm going to come to you first, but if anyone else wants to join in, please do.
I think what it is at the moment, like you said, it's a national issue, and I think universities have a tendency to wait for others to respond before posing a response themselves. I obviously understand the reasons behind that, but I think it's so important for a university, and whether that be Durham University or whether that be a different university somewhere else nationally, to take a stand. It then can mean that the other universities follow suit. I don't think it's necessary for all universities to agree nationally. I think each university needs to look at the impact that it's having on their individual students and act with a result that's right for their students rather than following others nationally.
Great, thank you. Would anyone else on the panel like to join in on that?
Yeah, I think that there are two main campaigns the UCU are pursuing. The first one is forfeits and the second one is pensions. So the forfeits is about basic issues in the workplace, jobs, pay and conditions. At Durham University, just one example is on average, male staff are paid 28.3% more than female staff. That is something the university have an absolute responsibility for. They can change that easily if there is the willpower to do so. On the pensions issue, that is national. UUK have a responsibility in that, but Durham University could be pushing for that within those circles. Thus far, they aren't. I think students should be furious about this because this was an entirely preventable dispute. What's really stark to me is just how moderate the UCU's demands are. They are not asking for the world. They are asking for dignity and respect in their workplace. And if there were the willpower, this dispute could be ended tomorrow, I think.
Great, thank you. Did you want to come in? Sorry.
Yeah, of course. I've spoken with the UCU on a number of occasions. I fully support their strike action. And I do believe that it can be won. I think they can win this dispute because, as just been said, some of those issues can be dealt with. The pensions issue, the UCU have come forward with a formula that will work, could be implemented and work out for everybody. But unfortunately, that's not being listened to. I think in terms of saying, the students, obviously, there's going to be an impact on students with those striking days. But if there's more negotiation happens, then those strike dates don't have to go ahead. But the students are already suffering because the lecturers are suffering now. They're overworked. These are human beings who are going through the cost of living as well. They're not the high paid bods in the university. It's your lecturers. Their working conditions, as I say, their working conditions are your learning conditions. So you have to, and I'm so pleased to see so many students stand in solidarity with the UCU. And yeah, there are local answers as well, because each university has different amounts of reserves that they can use. But nationally, they're sitting on a huge amount of reserves, and that cannot be justified when the lowest paid workers, some of them are on such insecure temporary contracts that what sort of life are they having? So I stand in solidarity with the UCU, and I'm glad to see that the students are also, and hopefully this will be sorted out before those other dates of strike action have to take place.
Great, thank you. Would we like to take another audience question? Over there. Man in red top, thank you.
So you've already touched on this somewhat, but do you think that the fact that these strikes are national, do you think it focuses attention better on the issue, or do you think it allows university to deflect its responsibilities?
Great, thank you. Daniel, I think is someone eye on national news. What are you thinking?
Yeah, it's often a case when you speak to people on the picket lines interviewing them. One of the lecturers I spoke to said to me, oh yes, because now it has to be resolved by a national deal. Obviously, last summer, I want to say, there was some issues solved just on a Durham level, which obviously now has to be national. She says, well, the chancellors are saying, I can't do anything, I'm just one chancellor. And her response to that was, well, if only the chancellors would organise in the way that the UCU does, it would be very easily solved. So I think that it is national. Certainly, I think objectively gives them a better mandate as well. I know it was new levels of streaming from Jo Grady, which was announced in the results, and she was very, very happy indeed. And the turnout they had a quote they had to reach. I think they had to get to 50% turnout, was it, for it to count. They got to 50% turnout. They had over 80% on both the forfeits and the pensions. So I think it shows in answer to your question, I think, it shows a stronger front if it's a national issue. But obviously, if it comes to a potential market boycott, that is concerning. That it's going to be harder to solve it on a Durham level as it was last year.
Great, thank you. Amanda, I'd like to bring you in, whilst you're not directly connected with the university, staff striking our County Durham and constituents and residents. Do you hold any concerns for their working conditions?
I believe everyone should have good working conditions. In 20 years in private industry, I was the union rep where I worked. So I have full support for workers' rights. It isn't always clear cut. It isn't always straightforward. If there is an anomaly between female and male pay for exactly the same job, that is a huge issue and that needs to be brought about. But sometimes the statistics aren't always what they appear to be because of the types of job and the different people who do different jobs. But for two people doing exactly the same job, if there's a difference in pay for a man and a woman doing the same job, that is fundamentally wrong on every level. However, there are issues where those figures are different because of the different job roles, and that's how it makes it look different. So it isn't always black and white, and nothing to do with strikes and working conditions is black and white. And also, and I hold my hands up, I don't know enough about the national terms, but I can speak from a council perspective on things like the Green Book. So when we talk about local authority pay and conditions, that is negotiated nationally, and we can't just come along and increase things for County Durham staff members because they're in a nationally agreed thing. And I don't know enough about how that works for the university staff, but I do fundamentally believe in people's rights to be able to stand up for what they believe in, for better pay and conditions and better terms and conditions for where they work. And I do believe it is also the employer's responsibility and right to sit round the table and work constructively to come up with an agreement, because you'll never do anything if you don't agree to meet and you don't agree to sit round constructively and try to come out with a solution.
Great, thank you. Mary, we're talking a lot about national level stuff. Is there any role the government, what should the government be doing?
Yeah, but where do you start? Really, with that question, I apologise. Yeah, well, I mean, there's not just this issue. The reason we've got the university staff striking, we've got rail workers striking, nurses striking, even junior doctors striking, posties striking, because, you know, since 2009, wages haven't gone up, and we've got double digits for the rise in inflation. The government like to blame Putin and the energy companies and what else? COVID, sorry, for everything, when we know that a lot of these issues started before the war in Ukraine and they started before COVID, with staff members haven't been paid a decent wage, and now we have the cost of living, the need to get the act together and show that, you know, these people who are on strike are friends or family or parents or children. It's not just, you know, you hear about, it's the union barons who are running the show here. Members take action very reluctantly, but they are taking action because they're at breaking point. And when we see nurses having to go to food banks or fire stations having food banks in there for their workers, something has to be done. And this week the government have brought in, they're trying to get passed a law that will even make our trade union rights now that we have worse. They're going to get rid of as many rights that the trade unions have, and bringing in that minimum service level agreements, and ultimately sacking nurses, if you like, for going on strike. So the university sector isn't alone in this, and I think it's really encouraging that the students are on board with that, because, as I say, it's your education at the end of the day, and you want the best teachers that you can get. And the government have got to get around the table and negotiate. That's the first starting point.
Great, thank you. Can we take another audience question? Yes, thank you. Man over there, blue, green top. Can you find him, James? Thank you.
Thank you. So I direct this question probably primarily towards Mary, but any of the other panel who wanted to answer it. We've heard from a few of you how you support the UCU strikes and the action that's being taken. And, you know, as a student, I can sympathise a lot with how lecturers have seen their pay fall in real terms significantly, and, you know, the contributions that they're being asked for their pensions going up. But when it comes to a marking boycott, which was discussed last year but thankfully avoided, and, you know, there's sort of talk that that might be happening again, would you support that as well? You know, from my perspective as a student, you're paying £27,000, much, much more once you account for the high interest rates on student loans, and you're actually paying it back. And you're paying that to get your degree. Now, if you get to the end of your 3 years and you can't end up getting your degree, which is, you know, what you've paid all that money for, that potentially disrupts, you know, the job that you've lined up afterwards and your future prospects quite significantly. And I'm just wondering what your perspectives on the panel are about a marking boycott.
Great, thank you, Mary. Just
Yeah, that's a serious issue, isn't it? The marking boycott, but it's all wrapped up in the whole dispute. I think it shows that, you know, your lecturers aren't taking this strike action easily. It's not what they want to do, but until the government listen, that's being put on the table. That, look, this is how serious it is. We will go ahead and do this. But unfortunately, and I'm not going to stand in the way of the UCU or say take one side or another when I haven't seen all the details of what that might be. And obviously the UCU are in a better position to negotiate around that wall. So I'll be keeping my eyes on the ball with what happens there. But I think it shows how desperate they are. They're in the role for you. It's your future and your education that they care about. So they're not going to do that lightly when you put in all of that work, and they've put all that work in for you not to then get the best degree that you possibly can. So I'm not going to make a judgment on whether or not it's the right thing. I think I stand side by side with the UCU, and if that's one of the measures that they've put on the table, then I'll work alongside them to hope that doesn't happen, and that the negotiations can continue and an agreement is settled before it gets to that stage.
Great, thank you. Oh, I just want to bring you in. Do you think these marking boycotts could decrease support from students?
I think potentially it does have the potential to decrease support from students. I think ultimately it's not the fault of the UCU workers or the students. I think both of them have been put into a very unfortunate situation, and those with the power and those with the authority are refusing to act on it, which is making the situation worse for both parties. Like Mary said, the UCU workers, as far as I know and as far as I can tell, being a former student myself, have the best interests of the students at heart, but they also do have to look out for themselves. And the situation is deteriorating so rapidly for them. Yes, obviously it's unfair on students, but it is also unfair on those who are teaching the students and all of the UCU workers who are involved in the strike action. I think the solidarity that students are giving currently at the moment shows how much they sympathise with the UCU workers, and I really hope that continues in the face of strikes and any actions short of a strike. I think what really needs to happen here is the university, those higher up, and the government and authorities need to decide on something which will appease the UCU workers and therefore allow students to get back to their education. I think that's the main, obviously, goal of university is to attain a degree. And if you're not able to do that, despite how much money you put into it, it's obviously so unfortunate. I think people like the university and the government need to realise the huge impact it would have on students, and therefore react in a way that stops the strikes.
Can I just jump in there? You ask about whether potentially student support could decrease with the marking boycott. I know Mary and Josh alluded to how good it is. You've got students in the picket line and how they're there in solidarity and support. We conducted a poll on the paper that finds already, regardless of whether there is one or not, even in principle, most students do not support a marking boycott. We had a poll of about a fifth of our readers, where only 34%, so about a third, would support a marking boycott. So while there is good support, we have 88% supporting the UCU to some extent. That drops to 62 backing the strike action that was taking place in November. But then to go down to a third shows that it would be seemingly lecturers pitted against students, and I think that's the point that was raised there. That sort of is where the line of majority student support is crossed.
Great, thank you. Josh, let's give you a chance to respond to that.
Yeah, so when we conducted this referendum, a marking boycott is part of all industrial action. That was voted for overwhelmingly. Only 40% of students disagreed with that. The turnout in that poll was, I suspect, bigger than the turnout in the poll Platinum did under time pressure. And I think students understand the position the UCU have been put in. A marking boycott will only happen if there are no other options left on the table. If the UCU try everything else, what choice do they have in terms of getting basic dignity and respect in their workplace? It is not the UCU at fault, and I absolutely defend their right to withdraw their labour in that way, and I think students do as well.
Great, thank you. So 5-minute warning for everyone now. We're going to take quick fire questions from the audience. So can we have hands up, please?
Hello. Just to link it to the last conversation we were having about the university's expansion, taking in more students, how does that link to this conversation, and what sort of conversations are being having about the staff and the teaching conditions, not just the housing conditions with this expansion?
Anyone like to take that?
I think it comes back to the point of marketised education. Universities should be place of learning, place of education, but they're not. They're run effectively like businesses run for profit, not for people. And that is the issue that comes to both housing and strikes. And I think there should be a very serious discussion about marketised education and the tuition fee system, which has allowed these two crises to happen.
Okay, I'm hearing noises. Is there any of you like to respond?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree with Josh. Like you said, it's a place of learning. And that should come first. But ultimately, with the expansion of students and the increasing admissions, we've seen lectures of 30 and 40 go up to 80 and 100, especially in more popular subjects like STEM subjects or business, etc. The university has planned expansions, and perhaps they're building, more accommodation blocks to cater for that. But they also need to be thinking about paying the existing workers that they have the right prices, to encourage those workers to stay on and kind of keep their employment within the university, but also thinking about branching out and employing more lecturers and seminar leaders and postgrad students, because ultimately, at the end of the day, students' education is what's suffering. You go from a tutorial of 3 to 5 people to suddenly 12, 20 people, and you're not getting what you paid for. You're not getting what you'd set out as your expectations when you first applied to this university. So I think there's something that really needs to be done to address those concerns.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, but I would agree wholly. And I think obviously that whole marketisation of higher education, of universities, just shows that the position that universities are put into, that they have to keep bringing in the most lucrative students, if you like, or we're going to bring more money into the system. So they're in between a rock and a hard place on that one, although I know that's hard to swallow for many students who see those gross differences in wages of, your pro-vice chancellors and then your lecturers, huge inequalities in pay there. So they need to come up with a very compelling argument as to why they're agreeing with that and not able to pay their staff a decent wage over the rate of inflation.
Great, thank you. This is going to be a very quick last minute thing. I've got a note in from the producers. Labour started marketisation under Blair. As two Labour supporters, what was your response to that?
Yeah, they did. It was very bad. And I think it is really disappointing, deeply disappointing to see the Labour leadership equivocate on this issue, particularly having pledged his commitment to the abolition of tuition fees during his leadership bid. I'm also on the National Labour Students Committee, and we are trying to put pressure on the leadership to U-turn on this, so Labour can be the party of free education and the party that will challenge market education.
Great, thank you, Mary. Just to retort to that.
Can I just come in there as someone who's taken years of abuse over this as a Liberal Democrat, and just remind everyone that tuition fees were introduced by an all-Labour government and were tripled under an all-Labour government, and therefore that it is a place and it does need to be addressed and it does need to be looked at. And just coming back on the bit about numbers and making sure any employer should be working on a plan to make sure that the business or the education or the school, and I'm a school governor and have been for years, in Key Stage 1 you have maximum of 30 pupils in a class. You cannot go over that. There's a good reason for it, and I think there's no reason why that shouldn't be looked at throughout the whole education, whether it's further education, higher education, adult education. There is a limit to how much you can do if you stretch it too far, and all you'll get is a second class service, and nobody deserves that.
Great, thank you. And I've just got to cover that with anything partly political, but I think student tuition fees and Liberal Democrats, the words don't really go together very well.
That's why I'm coming in with it.
I've got a feeling in the coalition that they totally U-turned on that promise to scrap.
Izzy, can I start one final point really quick? I think
you've got 1 minute. You've got 1 minute.
You touched upon it in the introduction, and I think it's so important. Previously, the university dedicating all the strike funds to student support since 2019 has not been the case. We did comment request about it, and I just want to read out the response because words sometimes fail me. As the full duration and impact of this period of industrial action is not yet known, we are unable to agree to Durham UCU's request to put all strike deductions into the Student Support Fund. And I think, why does the duration of strikes, if the money was formally going to help students, because there were different funds, it could go to help people who couldn't afford food, it could go to postgraduates who are struggling, there's so many places it can go, and it has gone in the past. Why it's not anymore, purely because they don't know how many strike days there will be, it just shocks me.
Okay, we're going to take a 10-minute interval now. Thank you very much. Please stick around. After 10 minutes, we're going to come back and we're going to discuss the North East devolution deal. I have a feeling it's going to get slightly more political than it's already been already. And welcome back. Thank you for staying after the break. We're going to be moving on now to our third and final topic, the North East devolution deal. And as we saw at the end of last thing, it's starting to get a little bit political. I would like to encourage a little bit of support from the audience. If someone says something you agree with, please feel free to clap. I'm going to discourage booing because I don't think that's very sportsmanlike. But if you agree with something, please clap. Audience participation is so key to this. But thank you so far for being a great audience. So moving on to our third and final topic, North East devolution deal. North East has recently signed a devolution deal which would have seen 7 local authorities, including County Durham, become united under a North East mayoral combined authority. This could see them share over £3 billion of funding over the next 30 years to aid levelling up in the area. This deal includes up to £563 million for new city region sustainable transport settlement with a focus on improving rail services. £17.4 million has been set aside for building new homes on brownfield land, and on top of another £20 million for regeneration projects, including building affordable new homes. Let's take an audience question first. Over there, thank you.
Thank you. Why would anyone object to the North East devolution deal, given that it provides County Durham with extra funding and jobs compared to signing a county deal?
Great, thank you. Amanda, as someone who probably knows the deal best here, what are your thoughts?
I don't know. Because I'm absolutely an advocate for joining the LA7, haven't got the figures for both, haven't gone through the whole process for both, and when, just to not correct Izzy, but just to update her, the 3 billion is not 3 billion, it's 4.2 billion, and an extra, up to potentially an extra 5 billion from private funding over that 30-year period. I could go through all the statistics of the two different deals, the fact that more of the LA7 deal relates to revenue funding rather than capital, so it isn't as restrictive. We don't work in a silo. People don't drive across the northeast and think, I have to stop at the boundary because I'm going to a different place. You don't get on a bus in Durham going to Newcastle and you cross through Gateshead. It's really important that we work together, and we already have done, especially with the Joint Transport Committee. Is it ideal? No, nothing's ideal, but you have to work with what you've got on the table, what's available now. And there were two options, one to look at a county deal and one to look at joining with the LA7. The county, and one of the biggest differences is in governance. So joining an LA7, the whole point of devolution is to take power from Whitehall and bring it to a more local level. The white paper was never written to account for unitary authorities. And as Durham is a unitary authority, if we went for a county deal, the whole of the governance of how Durham County Council runs would have changed. We would have had to have an elected mayor, and they would not only have had power over the devolved powers from Whitehall, they would have had total control over what all council services and how the council runs. Now that is fundamentally a difference to how things work now. And that mayor wouldn't have even had to elect a cabinet, wouldn't have even had to appoint a cabinet. They could have done it all on their own, depending on who the individual is. The governance for the North East Combined Authority for the LA7 is a mayor and 7 cabinet members, which is one from each of the 7 local authorities, and the mayor has no right to veto anything. So I do believe, with the figures, with the information, the papers are all there for everyone to read, that it is compelling reason why bigger is better in this case.
Great, thank you. Mary, Durham Labour has campaigned for an alternative devolution deal. Of course, not directly involved in that, but could you talk us through the Labour's point of view?
Well, it wasn't, just to be clear, it wasn't just Labour, and in fact, Manda and the MPs in the region were all against this deal just until a few months ago, because it is such a bad deal. It's better than nothing, which a lot of people say, but it's still a really poor deal. I was involved quite heavily with the original deal, which a number of the councils didn't sign up to, and rightly so. This deal, when you look at everything in the round, is just as bad, actually. And what it does, I think, what Labour are going to do is, once they win power, the next election, they'll be giving power away for real devolution. This is not really a brilliant devolution deal. I'm a strong believer in devolution and giving that power and funding to that local level. But what I fundamentally disagree with is the directly elected mayor. And, that creates a democratic deficit straight away, from having one person in charge from the top of Berwick to Bonnet Castle or further to, what on earth is that person, whoever they are, going to, who would say they're going to do the best for Durham? Durham's big enough to have it, to look at its own issues, its own future, be the masters of their own destiny. These were all things that all of the political parties in Durham were saying till just not long ago. So I'm really quite flabbergasted, and I'm keen to know why there was such a U-turn, if you like. And unfortunately, what's happened is this compelling argument. We've got this 563 for rail. There's other money in there for transport, but unfortunately, because Durham signed up so late in the day, came to the table late in the day, that Durham won't see a penny for transport for 3 years, that's a crucial part of devolution for me. And that's a huge issue in the county, is the public transport system, which isn't working. So yes, I agree with devolution, but I'm not convinced at all about this. Can
I just come in there, please, just to correct the transport issue? Mary is quite right. When this was first put on the table that a county deal was an option, because it wasn't, we were very interested in that. But as discussions went on, it became clear that government's preference, whether you like it or not, you have to work with what we've got on the table and what's in the white paper at this moment in time. Government's preference was for bigger mayoral combined authorities. So what was available in a county deal was nowhere near the same as what you could get if you joined a bigger mayoral combined authority. Now, it is quite right that we haven't got access to that £147 million in the first 3 years, but we do have access for the next 27 years of the 30-year deal to all of the transport money. In a county deal, we would never have had access because that money does not exist in any way, shape or form in any county deal. And if you don't believe me, go and read the county deals for Cornwall, for Norfolk, for Suffolk, because it doesn't exist. So in my view, and the view of the rest of the Cabinet, 27 years out of 30 years access to that money is damn sight better than nothing at all, because transport is so important. And had we been at the table at the start, you would have had a go at us then for not looking at a county deal from the start and not making sure we had looked at both options. And that's exactly what we did, because like it or not, I was born in Durham, I plan to retire in Durham and live here. I would never, ever do anything that I didn't think was in the best interests of the people of County Durham and the North East.
Great, thank you. Should we take another question from the audience? Over here, thank you.
So just related, talking about levelling up, do you feel snubbed by the recent distribution of levelling up funds, which I think saw 5 applications for town regenerations in County Durham, none of which were approved? Do you feel like there's a worsened north-south divide because of this?
Thank you, Mary. Absolutely. It's just, I knew levelling up was all a bit of a joke once the former whichever former Prime Minister it was, Boris Johnson, put that in his manifesto that he would level up the regions. And then the rounds that have happened now, there are 50 of the projects have gone to the Conservative MPs who are maybe likely to lose their seat, and only 20 of the projects have gone to Labour. So never mind people saying it isn't political or party political, it very much is. And you know, there are some of the areas, Canterbury and somewhere in Rishi Sunak's constituency, have had millions of pounds to do up a castle. One of them in Canterbury, millions to refurbish a castle. Levelling up was meant to be about levelling up the economy and giving those places that have been left behind for so long because of government neglect, left behind for so long that they need better jobs and better quality of life for people. That's what levelling up should be. I never believed it for a second that that's what was going to happen, but they've proved that it's just all hollow rhetoric from the Tories that this is about levelling up, because County Durham had really good plans on the table. There were good bids that were going to go in, that were going to do exactly that, to create jobs, help with culture, build the economy. And one of the poorest regions in the country, for us not to get a single penny is absolutely outrageous. Absolutely outrageous. And you know, all together, I know devolution isn't the same as levelling up, but I think the figures are, since 2018, or since I got elected, we are down through devolution and the levelling up. We're going to be down in Durham by £116 million. So we've got an awful lot of fighting to do. And I think what makes it even worse, really, is the fact that the levelling up minister, who I'm sure she was invited, Deanna Davison, she's a minister. She's then Bishop Auckland, and even she didn't have any clout over what might look over the government have given out. So the Tory MPs were pretty useless in terms of their influence over who got what and levelling up. But for County Durham to not get a single penny is absolutely outrageous.
Thank you. I just want to bring in the student perspective here. Of course, the university sees thousands of students pass through Durham. Some leave after graduation, some stay around. Josh and Urwah in particular, Dan as well. What was the impact for students staying or leaving Durham with funding?
I think we all know how badly the North East needs investment. It is a region historically left behind. Child poverty is at a 20-year high in this region, with almost 40% of children in the North East living below the poverty line. Again, unemployment in this region is higher than it is in other regions. And kind of, as Mary referenced, to see the North East kind of left behind in these recent announcements is deeply disappointing. And regrettably, it is the Tories doing what the Tories do best, looking after their own. And I think for students at the university to see their home in Durham being kind of left behind like that is deeply disappointing.
Great. Dan?
For me and for the student perspective, I think students, because they're entering the world of work for the first time after having completed their studies, they will take the deals from employers and businesses and companies that's most enticing to them. And if those deals, if those grad schemes, if those internships and placements are coming from London, Manchester and Liverpool, then those are the deals that students are going to take. Those are the ones that will give them the most money and for them the most benefits in terms of furthering their careers and making a name for themselves. So if those are the only options that they have, that's what students will go for. And therefore I think we see, especially in the North East, more and more students completing their studies and finishing their degrees here and then moving elsewhere to enter the world of work.
For me, I'd say it's about a culture change, really. I put in my notes, there's no way of sugarcoating it. Out of the issues we're discussing today, this is topic of conversation is probably the least interesting to our readers, but it is an important one because of the fact that we don't think about it. We publish our articles, they're often a lot smaller on devolution on County Durham News. And yet, if students, when they graduate, it's just accepted that they'll go down to London as has been touched upon, then that's just going to remain in place. Like we discussed with housing needing a culture change, being in a position where people want to live in college, likewise, there need to be the jobs here, because otherwise it's not going to happen as a result of not being talked about enough.
Yeah, can I pick up on that? And it was raised, those three areas that you go to. It's by no coincidence that Liverpool, Manchester and London all have directly elected mayors and big mayoral combined authorities, which only on a scale of the LA7 can we compete with. And just to answer the levelling up, extremely disappointed, absolutely gutted given the amount of work and planning that went into developing all of those bids. We were successful in the one that we put in the first round, so we haven't been a total failure. We have had 1 out of 6. But I actually think that emphasises exactly one of the reasons why the decision we made in Cabinet this week to go with the LA7 was so important. If somewhere as big as County Durham can be ignored on that scale, to that capacity, then what chance does a mayor who is representing 500,000 people compared to a mayor representing 2 million people and the 4th biggest combined authority at the table at government going to have it getting their voice heard? So we will always bat for County Durham. I will be sat round that cabinet table batting for County Durham to make sure we get exactly what we need, what we're entitled to. And everybody on this panel is right. For years, Durham has been at the wrong end of the league table for everything, whether it's child poverty, unemployment, health. It has to change. But if we continue to only look inside and not look and work with our partners, then we will always get what we've always had. So we've got to work at moving forwards. But to answer your question on levelling up, absolutely disappointed, and we will be forensically looking at who got what and what those schemes were compared to the criteria that was given for the applications, because some of the applications we put in, if, for example, it was a points-based system and you needed 10 points, some of those were 40 or 50 points type of applications that were way and above what the criteria was. So I think there will be a lot of forensic looking at some of these levelling up bids and what's been agreed and what hasn't been funded.
Great, thank you, Josh. We'll come to you in 1 second, but I just want to supplement what Amanda's saying. So there is a council report on the deal that is saying it would give more jobs and more money. Could you expand upon that?
Yeah. So if it was a county deal, so I had jotted some of the figures because you can imagine figures. So a regional deal is predicted to bring 6,500 jobs to County Durham, which is 2,000 more than a county deal. It would attract £1.34 billion of private sector investment into the county, which is £400 million more than a county deal. And if I can just reiterate, the size of County Durham, we're over a population of over 500,000 people. The population of the whole of the North East Combined Authority is going to be 2 million. We represent over a quarter of the population. It will be a very poor politician who is elected as the mayor who chooses to ignore County Durham and the vote that will come with that, because they won't do more than one term. That's an absolute guarantee. Because I have to speak from experience, because I do sit on the LEP and I am part of the current North East Combined Authority, and County Durham have bid for funding through the LEP, and we have had more than our fair share. There has never been a bias in those funding applications towards the Tyne and Weir authorities, which is what we keep getting told from people, is that I believe the phrase is, we will get crumbs off the table.
Great, thank you, Josh. Thank you for waiting patiently.
Don't worry. I think other people on the panel have probably put it more eloquently than me. But I was just going to reflect on how heartbreaking it is that because of the way the economy is structured, most of us will end up having to go to London or through other metropolitan areas for our employment opportunity. I come from a rural area in the northwest, and I can say that there is just a generation missing. That being young graduates from these areas who all feel the need to move to Manchester, Liverpool or London. And it means that these communities are getting left behind. There are very few opportunities for young people in these regions. I think if we want to preserve and treasure these communities, there absolutely needs to be more thinking done and more work done to make sure every young person, no matter where they are in the country, has the same access to opportunity.
Great, thank you. Mary, I'd like to give you a chance to respond to what Amanda's been saying about this being a very beneficial deal. Do you agree?
Well, I haven't been party to all of those figures. I have spoken to the current mayor recently, who obviously thinks it's a good deal. I asked him what he would be doing for Durham. I think Amanda's right. You're going to have to negotiate at the table, because the LA7 already, they've gone so far, the local authorities already in it have gone so far down the line of what their plans are for the region without Durham. So there's going to have to be quite a few changes quite quickly to see how Durham is included in that. I think when I was first elected and we were talking about devolution, everyone around the table wanted to go for the county deal. So I'm wondering really what swung it for Amanda at the end, with you being so derisively against the LA7 to now of being, you find it a very compelling argument that it's
the facts.
The facts. Well, how did you not know that before?
Because it wasn't
sorry. If you've sat at that table for so long, how did you not know that it was such a bad deal, the Durham deal? Then, if you've been in those negotiations, I haven't been party to those negotiations. But if you have, why are you just
referring to? Was probably about 2 weeks into us coming into control at the council, and it was before the white paper was even published, and it was to say that a county deal would be a county up, to say that if there was a county deal on the table, we would look at it, and that would be our preferred option if it was as good. But it clearly is not as good, and it takes somebody, when you sit down and look at the facts, and that's what I would ask people to do if you have any concerns about it, is read the documents. It's on the gov.uk website, or it's in the cabinet report from last week that gives you the comparisons. And again, you can only work with what you're given. Government would not start negotiations until you make a distinct decision which way you're going to go. So we were given all of the figures that were likely to be in a county deal. Then we were given 3 days notice to say you either go in county, or you've got to go with the LA7 and create the LA7. If the LA7 had gone along without County Durham, then we wouldn't have been able to join. we wouldn't have been able to access all that extra funding. So on the facts that you have available to you at that moment in time, within those 3 days, the discussions were made. We'd looked through both options, and you are wrong when you say that it has all been negotiated with the LA6. Again, please read the report. There is absolutely no ring-fence money to any single development, any single application. There is reference to schemes in there, but there's reference to Durham schemes in there as well. But there's been no divvying up of money, nothing like that, because it can't, because there hasn't been a mayor elected yet. The mayor will stand on their own manifesto, and it will be up to the people of the North East to elect who they want on their priorities, and then for the cabinet to work with them.
Thank you, Amanda. And hopefully when the cabinet will agree, but then will it be going to full council for democratic sign-off, the deal?
It will be following the process that is in place through the executive and through the process that's set out by government. For do that, it is an executive decision.
Executive?
As in the cabinet decision.
Oh, so not the full council?
No, it's not a full council decision, this.
The whole thing is, it's about democracy, and Amanda, I was against the one in Gateshead. I still feel as if that huge geography with one mayor in control is wrong. And I think it's far from ideal if you only had 3 days to digest all that information, then I have to agree.
It's 3 days to make a decision, yes or no. We had the information that we'd been working on, but literally that is what. And like I said, you have to work on, and I have read the Labour paper, Gordon Brown's document, and this wouldn't change with a change of government. And I have most recently listened to the shadow cabinet member Lisa Nandy speak to us at the County Council Network conference, and this is the type of policy that they would want to continue with. And you can understand that when you look at the high profile Labour mayors like Andy Burnham, Steve Rotherham, Tracy Braben. They are not going to want to change how things work, because they're doing some really good things for their areas. And whether we like it or not, there's lots of things we probably all don't agree with, we probably all don't like, and would like it done a different way. But we have to work with the situation we have. And this is the situation right now.
Thank you. We've decided so we've only got 5 minutes left, so I am going to move the conversation on. Thank you. This is an important conversation to have. But this is a final question for all of the panel. It's quite a philosophical one in a way, but hopefully a great way to sum up at the end. What do you see is the future of Durham? Daniel, I'll start with you.
There is hope, but I think based on what we've discussed today, if the right actions are taken, we've heard good things about discussions that Mary's had with the university and council working with the university in terms of actually making progress rather than just nice things being said, which is good, and we like that. I do worry. I think we all like to say we'll take the university at what they say at face value, but there are worries about expansion. And if the only 1,000 more students over the next few years is met, and more of them go into college, then the city should be okay. But there are fears from a lot of students who talk to me, and they are scared of having to drop out in some cases, whether it be the financial implications or several other issues. So what we've talked about today, I say we need to see in practice more and more and more if there is to be a positive trajectory rather than it tailing off.
Great, thank you.
I absolutely agree. I think Durham's future will remain quite similar to how it is currently and how it has been in the past. Ultimately, a place of community and a place of learning, and I really hope that it does remain that way and continue in the future. But I do agree that there are more and more issues cropping up which negatively affect students, those working at the university, and also residents of the local town and the wider city. I think there needs to be something done to address those concerns in order to keep the community sense that we've built up over the years. I think Durham is a lovely place to study and a lovely place to live, but I don't think it can continue on in the way that it has been for so long without something drastic being done to resolve those issues.
Thank you, Mary. I think Durham is, until there's a change of government, it's going to continue to be very bleak. Although I'm a person who has a lot of hope as well, and I know that the people of Durham want the best, and it's a brilliant place to come and live and work. But we've seen child poverty rise, and we've seen so many people with the cost of living, not the jobs that we would like. And until there is a change of government, we've got 3 Tory MPs here who haven't been able to do a thing for Durham. Nothing with the levelling up. They've had no say whatsoever in it, apart from the minister who did get the one project that did happen was for Dehenna's constituency. We need a change of government. We need, for us to all work together and lobby the government to see what a brilliant place this is to come to invest. And we need those decent jobs here so that students can stay here. We don't have that brain drain and the students going off to down south where the bright lights are. We need students to stay here and keep their talent and skills here and build the economy here. But it won't happen whilst the Tory government are in place.
Yeah, I think my point will end up echoing Mary's quite a bit. But Durham doesn't exist in a vacuum. The future of Durham is intrinsically tied to the national picture. And I think the future that Durham has will be dependent on us, students, the local community coming together to get our voice heard on the national stage, to say that enough is enough and to challenge the ongoing cost of living crisis, the ongoing housing crisis, and get legislation in place that will make a real material difference to all of us.
Thank you. And Amanda? Yeah.
I think the future for Durham can be extremely bright. If you talk something down long enough, it'll happen. But if you talk it up, it will also happen. We have, and I'm not here to defend any government, but Durham has been at the bottom of the spectrum for a lot of years and a lot more for generations. And that was when we did even have the Prime Minister live and represent a County Durham constituency. We still weren't at the top of any pile. So I don't think that we can rely on any national government to be in control of our destiny. And that's why, despite the flaws with it, I do believe that devolving powers from Whitehall to the northeast gives us a better say for what we can do for our future, gives us a seat at the table, which we don't have now. And I do believe that we can keep what is important to us, but grow in the future and have a really diverse, forward-looking County Durham for future generations.
Thank you, Amanda. Well, that is all we have time for today. I would like to say a big thank you to all our panellists for attending today. Please can we give them a round of applause? And I would also like to give a massive thank you to you, our audience, for turning up today, for taking time out of your day to come and asking such insightful questions. Thank you again. I think you can give yourselves a round of applause, but panellists will give you applause as well. Thank you. And so with all that to say, I've been Izzy Jones and you've been watching PalTV. Thank you.